What if one message could wreck everything you thought was secure? Stick around, you won't believe what happens next. Please subscribe to support our channel to stay updated with our latest stories. And comment below, where in the world are you watching from? For most of my adult life, I had found comfort in the predictable. My mornings began with the scent of damp earth and roses as I tended to my garden, the quiet hum of bees a gentle reminder of life's rhythm. Afternoons were spent lost in the pages of Austen or Bronte, reliving their heroines' passions from the safety of my own well-ordered existence. Evenings were a ritual, Graham and I sitting by the fire, him with his newspaper, me with my thoughts. It wasn't an unhappy life. Stability, after all, is its own form of happiness. But looking back, I wonder if I mistook comfort for contentment, routine for love. I had once believed that Graham and I were one of those couples who had simply settled into a quiet, comfortable understanding. The kind of love that had outgrown the feverish intensity of youth and matured into something solid, dependable. The kind that didn't need grand gestures or constant reassurances. We had our roles: Graham, the provider, the ambitious, respected man at his firm. And I, the wife who kept the home, managed the small details of our shared life, ensuring the world he stepped into each evening was always orderly, warm, and waiting for him. But perhaps the greatest deceptions are the ones we tell ourselves. The night of the gala was meant to be another unremarkable evening. I would stand at Graham's side, nodding in the right places, making pleasant conversation with colleagues' wives. Graham would talk business, his voice animated with professional ambition, and I would pretend to listen while mentally cataloging my grocery list. That was our dance. One we had perfected over the years. It was in the Blackstone Hotel's grand ballroom that the first crack in my illusion of stability appeared. The room glittered, gold chandeliers casting a warm glow over the polished marble floors, the soft murmur of conversations punctuated by the chime of crystal glasses. The women were draped in silk and jewels, their laughter light and effortless, as if they had mastered the art of belonging in places like these. I had always felt like an outsider in these gatherings, my presence an accessory to Graham's success rather than something of significance in its own right. Graham, as expected, had been swept into the tide of corporate conversations, his presence sought after like a prized commodity. I lingered at the periphery, watching the evening unfold with the kind of practiced patience I had developed over years of such events. Then, Arthur Vance approached me. His presence was commanding without being ostentatious. He wasn't the loudest in the room, nor did he need to be. There was something about him, his quiet confidence, the way he observed before he spoke, that made people listen. He had always been an enigma to me, a man of influence who rarely indulged in idle small talk. So when he stepped away from a conversation and turned his attention to me, I was caught off guard. "Eleanor," he said, his voice smooth, deliberate. "Would you care for a walk?" I hesitated, glancing toward Graham, who was too engrossed in his discussion to notice me. I should have declined. There was no reason, no logical reason, to follow this man down a quiet hallway, away from the security of the familiar. And yet, something in his gaze suggested that this was not just a polite invitation. So I followed. The moment we stepped into the dimly lit corridor, the energy shifted. The noise of the ballroom softened into a distant hum, the air cooler, more intimate. Arthur led me into a secluded library, its walls lined with leather-bound books, the faint scent of aged paper and oak filling the space. He shut the door softly behind us and turned to face me. For a long moment, he simply looked at me. Not in the way a man admires a woman's dress or the way a colleague's wife is politely acknowledged at an event. It was a gaze that made me feel as though I were being studied, seen in a way I had not been in years. "I imagine you're wondering why I pulled you away from the party," he said, a trace of something unreadable in his tone. I swallowed, suddenly aware of the erratic rhythm of my heartbeat. It did cross my mind. He exhaled, running a hand through his silver hair, as if searching for the right words. "I won't keep you long, but I felt compelled to speak with you." I frowned. "About what?" He hesitated, and I saw a flicker of something. Regret, perhaps? Resignation? Then, with quiet resolve, he said, "It's about Graham." A familiar tension coiled in my stomach. What about him? Arthur studied me for a moment, as if weighing how much to reveal. I've worked with Graham for a long time. I've seen the man he is in meetings, in negotiations, in moments of triumph and pressure. But I've also seen the man he is outside of those spaces. I bristled slightly. Graham is a good man. A dedicated husband. Arthur nodded. He is. But Eleanor, have you ever wondered if being a good husband is the same as truly seeing the woman he married? The words hung between us, heavy and unrelenting. I opened my mouth, ready to refute, but something in his expression stopped me. There was no malice, no ulterior motive. Just a quiet, almost sorrowful understanding. He doesn't see you, Arthur said gently. Not the way you deserve to be seen. I felt something inside me crack, a tiny fissure in the wall I had carefully constructed around my heart. Graham loved me. I had never doubted that. But love, I was beginning to realize, could exist without acknowledgement. Without true awareness. I had spent decades ensuring Graham's world ran smoothly, that his life was filled with comfort and certainty. But when had he last asked about my world? When had he last truly looked at me, not as a fixture in our home, not as a companion in routine, but as a woman with thoughts, desires, and quiet loneliness of her own? Arthur's words had not created the doubt. They had merely illuminated something I had long chosen to ignore. I exhaled shakily, forcing a small, practiced smile. Arthur, I appreciate your concern, but marriage isn't about constant attention. It's about stability, about knowing you have someone beside you no matter what. Arthur's gaze didn't waver. I understand. He took a step back, nodding slightly. I just wanted to say it. Because sometimes, we don't realize how much we've been unseen until someone points it out. Silence stretched between us. And then, with a quiet nod, he turned toward the door. I followed him back into the corridor, back to the ballroom, back to the life I had so carefully constructed. Graham was still in conversation when I returned, his posture relaxed, his laughter light. He didn't notice me at first. And for the first time, I wondered how many times I had stood in this exact position, watching him, waiting to be noticed. When he finally glanced my way, he gave me a small nod before turning back to his colleagues. The illusion of stability had cracked. And I wasn't sure if I was relieved or terrified. Arthur's words had unraveled something within me, a thread pulled loose from a fabric I had thought unbreakable. He doesn't see you, Eleanor. The words echoed long after I left the dimly lit library. I returned to the ballroom, my pulse still unsteady, my thoughts tangled in ways I couldn't quite sort through. The chandeliers above shimmered in opulent defiance of the unease growing inside me, casting golden reflections on the polished floor. Everything about the evening remained unchanged. People laughed, glasses clinked, conversations ebbed and flowed. The world carried on, unaware that something inside me had shifted. And Graham, he was exactly where I had left him. His head tilted forward in concentration, his posture one of quiet authority. He was listening intently to a man whose name I could never quite remember, nodding at appropriate intervals, his expression thoughtful. His hands, strong and sure, rested on the edge of his whiskey glass. The familiarity of the sight should have comforted me. Instead, it made my stomach twist. He did not notice me at first. When he did, it was with a fleeting glance, a nod, and nothing more. For the first time, I felt the sting of it. Arthur's words had done something I wasn't prepared for. They had opened a door in my mind, one I had long kept closed. As the gala carried on, I replayed moments from our marriage, little memories that now seemed tinged with sadness. Had Graham always been this way? Had I simply never noticed, or had I spent years making excuses for his inattentiveness? I thought back to our early years, when love was still something delicate and unshaped. I remembered the way he used to reach for my hand absent-mindedly, how his touch lingered just a second longer than necessary. The way he used to look at me, not through me, not past me, but at me, as if I were something he wanted to understand. When had that changed? Had there been a moment, a single defining second when the warmth between us had begun to cool? Or had it been gradual, like the slow erosion of cliffs by the sea, so imperceptible in its happening that you only noticed when it was already gone? A soft voice pulled me from my thoughts. "You're somewhere else." I turned. Arthur stood beside me, his gaze steady, reading me in a way I had not been read in years. I swallowed, willing away the lump in my throat. "I'm just tired." A small smile played at the corner of his lips, but there was something else in his expression. A quiet knowing. "I'm sorry if I unsettled you earlier. I should have dismissed it. Should have laughed and told him I was fine. Instead, I found myself saying, 'It's just odd. Realizing something about your life that you didn't even know was missing.'" Arthur exhaled slowly, his hands slipping into the pockets of his tuxedo. "Realizations like that are difficult. They change things. Do they?" My voice was quieter than I intended. He nodded. "Once you see something for what it is, you can't unsee it." I shivered slightly. Not from the cold, but from the truth of it. We stood in silence for a moment, the air between us thick with something unspoken. Then, before I could say anything more, Arthur inclined his head. "I should let you get back to your evening." He left me standing there, staring at the spot where he had been only seconds ago. And for the first time in years, I felt truly alone. That night, the quiet of our bedroom was suffocating. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, the weight of the evening pressing down on me. Beside me, Graham's breathing was even, steady. He had fallen asleep almost instantly, as he always did. He existed in his world, and I existed in mine. I turned onto my side, watching him. There was a time when I had memorized the lines of his face in the moonlight, traced them with my fingers as if trying to map out the future we would build together. I had once believed that love meant knowing someone so well that they became a part of you. But now, lying there in the dark, I realized something terrifying. I no longer knew him. And worse, he no longer knew me. I had changed. Or perhaps, I had always been changing, and he had simply never noticed. I thought about the woman I had been when we first married. I had been bright, hopeful, filled with dreams that I never spoke aloud because I was too busy making room for his. Somewhere along the way, my own desires had become whispers in the back of my mind, drowned out by the rhythm of a life built around his world. But now, Arthur's words had awakened something in me. And I was beginning to wonder if I could ever go back to sleep. The next morning, I moved through the house in a daze. Graham barely looked up from his coffee when I entered the kitchen. "Morning," he said absently, flipping through the financial section of the newspaper. I hesitated, then poured myself a cup of tea. The silence stretched between us, thick and uncomfortable. I felt like a guest in my own home. I cleared my throat. "Did you enjoy the gala?" Graham barely glanced up. "Oh, yes. Productive evening. Made some important connections." "You?" I opened my mouth, then hesitated. Did I tell him? Did I tell him that a conversation with another man had cracked something inside me? That I had spent the night dissecting our marriage, questioning everything I had once thought unshakable? In the end, I said, "It was fine." Graham nodded, already absorbed back into his world of stock trends and market projections. And that was the moment I knew. It wasn't that he didn't love me. It was that he had stopped seeing me a long time ago. And I had let him. The weeks that followed were filled with a strange kind of tension. Not outwardly, everything remained the same. I still moved through my days as I always had. I still took care of the house, still hosted dinner parties, still played the part of the perfect wife. But inside, I was unraveling. I started noticing things I had ignored before. The way Graham spoke more to his business associates than to me. The way he asked about my day out of obligation rather than genuine interest. The way I had begun to fade into the background of my own life. And then, there was Arthur. I saw him at another event a few weeks later. He greeted me with the same quiet intensity, as if he had been waiting for this moment. "Eleanor," he said, his voice warm. "How have you been?" I hesitated. There were a dozen ways I could answer, each safer than the last. But instead, I found myself saying, "Different." Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "Good different or difficult different?" I exhaled. "Both." A slow smile touched his lips, something understanding, something knowing. Change always is. And just like that, the conversation that had begun weeks ago, the one that had cracked something inside me, continued. And I knew, with a certainty that unsettled me, that my life was no longer on the same path it had once been. Because once a door has been opened, it cannot be closed. And I was beginning to realize I didn't want to close it. The next morning, I awoke early, unable to shake the previous night's conversation. Arthur's words had taken root inside me, winding their way into places I had long kept untouched. I moved through the house as if in a dream, my body following familiar routines while my mind wandered elsewhere. As I brewed coffee, the rich aroma filling the kitchen, I heard the soft, measured steps of Graham entering the room. He was already dressed for work, crisp suit, navy tie knotted with perfect precision. His hair, dark with only the slightest hint of gray, was combed back neatly, a reflection of the order that governed his life. He barely looked up from his phone as he spoke. "Did you enjoy yourself last night?" I hesitated. It was a simple question. The kind of question a husband asks out of habit, expecting a simple answer. But something about it made my chest tighten. It was interesting. Graham hummed in acknowledgement but didn't press further. His attention was already shifting, his fingers moving across his phone screen, his mind somewhere else. I swallowed, the words pressing against the back of my throat. I wanted to say them. I wanted to ask him outright, "Do you see me, Graham?" But I didn't. Instead, I watched him go about his morning routine, his movements efficient, practiced. He had always been this way, structured, disciplined. I used to admire it. I used to think of it as a sign of his unwavering dedication, his reliability. Now, I wondered if I had mistaken his discipline for devotion. By the time he left for work, I felt an unfamiliar hollowness settle in my chest. For the rest of the day, I found myself lost in thought. I wandered through the house, pausing in front of framed photographs, memories frozen in time. There was our wedding photo, Graham in his tuxedo, his smile careful, composed, while my own was wide, almost breathless. I remembered that day so vividly, the nervous excitement in my chest, the absolute certainty that this was my forever. Had he smiled at me like that recently? Had I smiled at him? I thought of the small moments that had once defined our love, the way he used to brush a stray curl behind my ear, the way his hand would find mine beneath the dinner table, the way he used to kiss my forehead before leaving for work. When had those moments stopped? I tried to pinpoint the exact time, the exact day when things had changed, but I couldn't. That was the most unsettling part. It hadn't been a single moment. It had been gradual, like a crack in a foundation that grows wider over time, unnoticed until the structure is no longer sound. I spent the afternoon in the garden, pulling weeds with a quiet intensity, letting the soil crumble between my fingers. The sun was warm against my skin, the scent of earth and blooming roses thick in the air. This had always been my sanctuary, my escape. But today, even the garden could not quiet the restlessness growing inside me. That evening, when Graham returned home, I watched him more closely than I ever had before. He walked into the kitchen, setting his briefcase down, his tie slightly loosened. "Long day," he said, rubbing the back of his neck. I nodded. "Dinner is almost ready." He kissed my cheek, a brief, perfunctory thing, like checking off an item on a list. Then he moved past me, pouring himself a drink. It was such a small thing, but it struck me. Would he notice if I didn't set the table? If I didn't ask about his day? If I simply stopped existing within the comfortable rhythm of our life? Would it take him a day to notice? A week? A month? I sat across from him at the dinner table, watching as he scrolled through emails on his phone between bites of his meal. There was no malice in his silence, no conscious neglect. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't unkind. He was just distant. The worst part was realizing that this was normal. That I had allowed this to become normal. Later that night, as we lay in bed, I turned onto my side, facing him. "Graham?" He made a small noise of acknowledgement, his eyes still fixed on the book in his hands. I hesitated. I could feel the weight of the words pressing against my ribs, desperate to escape. "Do you still love me the way you used to? Do you miss me when I'm not there? Do you see me?" But when I opened my mouth, all that came out was, "Good night." He didn't look up. "Good night." I stared at the ceiling long after he had turned off his bedside lamp, long after his breathing had slowed into sleep. I felt something inside me break. Not loudly. Not in a way that demanded attention. But in the quiet, devastating way that only the slow death of love can bring. In the following days, I tried to shake the feeling, tried to tell myself I was overthinking it. I threw myself into my routines, morning walks through the park, afternoons spent in my garden, evenings with books that I used as shields against my own thoughts. But no matter how much I tried to ignore it, the truth remained. I was lonely. Not in the obvious, dramatic way that loneliness is often portrayed. I had friends. I had a husband. I had a life that, from the outside, looked full. But loneliness is not always about the absence of people. Sometimes, it is about the absence of being truly seen. And I wasn't sure when I had last felt seen. Arthur appeared again at a charity event 2 weeks later. I spotted him across the room, deep in conversation with someone I didn't recognize. When his eyes met mine, there was no hesitation, no flicker of uncertainty. He saw me. I wasn't sure what unsettled me more, that he saw me, or that I wanted him to. As the night wore on, I felt the familiar weight of Graham's presence beside me. He made conversation effortlessly, laughing in the right places, shaking hands with the right people. We were the perfect couple, the kind that others admired for their grace and stability. But I couldn't stop hearing Arthur's voice in my head. "He doesn't see you." It was only when Arthur finally approached me, his voice low, his gaze searching, that I realized I was holding my breath. "Eleanor." Something inside me twisted at the way he said my name, carefully, deliberately, as though it meant something. He studied me for a moment, then said softly, "Are you happy?" I should have lied. I should have laughed and told him that of course I was happy. That my life was wonderful, perfect. Instead, I exhaled. And with a quiet, painful honesty, I said, "I don't know anymore." Arthur's gaze didn't waver. "Then maybe it's time to find out." The words settled into my chest, anchoring themselves deep inside me. And for the first time, I realized that the cracks in my marriage weren't just cracks. They were widening into something irreparable. And I had no idea what to do about it. Days passed, but the seed Arthur planted continued to grow. It started as a whisper in the back of my mind, an unease I couldn't shake. I told myself it was nothing, that I was overanalyzing a simple conversation, that I was imagining the distance between Graham and me. But the more I tried to ignore it, the more persistent it became. It followed me in the quiet moments, when I stood at the kitchen sink, watching the water swirl down the drain, when I lay in bed at night, listening to Graham's steady breathing beside me. It was there in the way my fingers traced the spines of books I had once loved, in the way my heart ached with a nostalgia I couldn't quite name. And so, I did what I had always done, I searched for answers in the past. I found myself lingering over old conversations, dissecting them for signs I had ignored. I thought back to our early years, the stolen kisses in the rain, the whispered dreams of growing old together. The way Graham used to pull me close without thinking, his hand finding the small of my back, as if drawn by instinct. The way he once looked at me, as though I was the only person in the room. Had I imagined it? Had it truly been that way? Or had I simply wanted to believe it? One afternoon, restless and in need of escape, I found myself wandering downtown. The city felt different than I remembered, busier, louder, faster. Or perhaps it was I who had changed, no longer fitting into its rhythm the way I once had. Without thinking, I turned down a familiar street and stopped in front of a small bookstore, its window display filled with first editions and well-loved paperbacks. It had been years since I'd stepped inside. The bell above the door chimed as I entered, and a wave of warm, familiar scents washed over me, the musty pages of old books, the faint sweetness of aged wood. I ran my fingers along the spines of the novels, titles that had once felt like dear friends. I traced the gold lettering of Pride and Prejudice, the worn cover of Wuthering Heights. These books had once filled my days, my thoughts. They had been my refuge, my escape. And then, somewhere along the way, I had stopped reading them. I stood there for a long time, the weight of the realization pressing down on me. I could not remember the last time I had done something purely for myself. It had always been about Graham, his career, his ambitions, his needs. When had I stopped being a person outside of him? I pulled a book from the shelf and flipped through its pages absent-mindedly, my mind elsewhere. Eleanor. I turned sharply at the sound of my name. Arthur stood a few feet away, watching me. For a moment, I could only stare. The last time I had seen him, his words had left me unsteady, questioning everything. And now, here he was again, as though summoned by my thoughts. "What are you doing here?" I asked, my voice softer than I intended. His lips curved into a small smile. "I come here often." "You?" I glanced down at the book in my hands. "I used to." Arthur tilted his head slightly, studying me. "And why did you stop?" I opened my mouth, then hesitated. There were a dozen answers I could have given. Life got busy. Responsibilities took over. There wasn't enough time. But they all felt like excuses. The truth was simpler. I had stopped being the kind of woman who did things just because they made her happy. "I don't know," I admitted. Arthur nodded, as if he understood. "You used to love books," he said after a moment. "I remember." His words startled me. We had known each other in passing for years, social gatherings, charity events, the occasional polite conversation. But I hadn't realized he had been paying attention. I looked at him, really looked at him. There was something in his gaze, something steady and knowing, that made my pulse quicken. "I still do," I said, though the words felt more like a promise than a statement. Arthur smiled, a slow, knowing smile, and for a moment, I forgot to breathe. That evening, I sat at the kitchen table long after dinner had been cleared away, staring at the book I had bought. I turned the pages, but I wasn't reading. My thoughts kept drifting, to Arthur, to the way he had looked at me, to the quiet weight of his words. "You used to love books." It was such a simple statement, yet it had unearthed something in me. A version of myself I had forgotten. A version of myself that still existed, buried beneath the years. Across the room, Graham sat on the couch, scrolling through his phone. The television played softly in the background, but I doubted he was watching. I studied him, trying to remember the last time he had looked at me the way Arthur had. I couldn't. I swallowed hard. "Graham," I said. He glanced up. I hesitated. For a brief, fleeting moment, I considered telling him everything. I considered telling him how I felt, how I had been feeling for years. The loneliness, the distance, the quiet ache that had settled between us. But I didn't. Instead, I asked, "Do you remember the last book I read?" He frowned slightly. "What?" "The last book I read," I repeated. "Do you remember what it was?" He blinked, caught off guard. I don't know. Something by Austen, probably?" His answer shouldn't have hurt. But it did. I forced a smile. Never mind. Graham shrugged, already turning his attention back to his phone. And just like that, the conversation was over. I exhaled slowly, pressing my palms against the smooth surface of the table, grounding myself. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even surprised. I was just tired. Tired of feeling like a ghost in my own marriage. That night, I lay awake, staring at the ceiling. Graham slept soundly beside me, his breathing even. I turned onto my side, watching him. He looked so peaceful, so untroubled. Did he ever feel the weight of it? Did he ever sense the growing chasm between us? Or had he, like me, convinced himself that routine was enough? I thought of Arthur's words, of the way he had looked at me in the bookstore. And for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder. Was I truly afraid of losing Graham? Or was I more afraid of losing myself? The next morning, I woke before the sun. I slipped out of bed quietly, careful not to wake Graham, and wrapped myself in a robe. In the dim light of dawn, I picked up the book from the night before and turned to the first page. I began to read. And for the first time in years, I did something just for me. A week after the gala, I received an unexpected message from Arthur. A simple invitation, lunch at a quiet cafe. I stared at the screen for a long time, my fingers hovering over the reply button. I could ignore it. Pretend I never saw it. But that would be a lie. A lie to myself. The truth was, I had been thinking about Arthur's words ever since that night. They had embedded themselves in my thoughts, unraveling years of quiet denial. He doesn't see you, Eleanor. I had tried to push them away, to tell myself they didn't matter. But they did. More than I wanted to admit. Meeting Arthur wouldn't be improper. We had known each other for years. It was just lunch. And yet, I knew, deep in my heart, that accepting his invitation meant acknowledging the truth I was trying so hard to ignore. With a deep breath, I typed a response. I'll be there. The cafe was tucked away on a quiet street, the kind of place people passed without noticing. It smelled of freshly ground coffee and warm bread, the air thick with the soft hum of conversations. Arthur was already there when I arrived, a cup of coffee in front of him, his expression unreadable. He saw me before I reached the table and stood, a warm smile spreading across his face. Eleanor. There was something in the way he said my name, as though it belonged to someone he had been waiting for. I nodded in greeting, my hands tightening around the strap of my purse. I wasn't sure if you would come, he admitted as I sat down. I exhaled. Neither was I. A moment of silence stretched between us, filled with an unspoken understanding. Arthur studied me for a long moment before speaking. Have you thought about what I said? I looked away, tracing the rim of the menu with my fingertip. I have. And I met his gaze then, something fragile and uncertain stirring in my chest. I don't know what to do with it. Arthur sighed, leaning forward slightly. His eyes held no judgment, only patience. I didn't say what I did to upset you, he said quietly. I said it because I've watched you for years, Eleanor. And I've seen how much you give. I swallowed hard. I wanted you to know that someone sees you. Something in me cracked at those words. Someone sees you. For so long, I had convinced myself that invisibility was a natural part of marriage. That love was found in routines, in quiet coexistence. That the absence of acknowledgement wasn't neglect, it was just life. But what if it wasn't? I clenched my hands in my lap, willing away the sudden sting in my eyes. Arthur must have noticed. He exhaled softly, leaning back against his chair. I'm sorry, he said. I shook my head. Don't be. Another silence settled between us, but it wasn't uncomfortable. It was filled with understanding. The waitress came by, and we ordered 2 salads and an extra coffee for me. As she walked away, Arthur watched me carefully. Tell me something, he said. When was the last time you did something just for yourself? I hesitated. He smiled, a little sadly. That's what I thought. I exhaled, shaking my head. I don't know. I suppose life just happens. Marriage happens. You get caught up in the rhythm of it all. Arthur nodded. And somewhere along the way, you disappear. I didn't answer. Because we both knew he was right. The conversation drifted to lighter topics: the cafe, a book Arthur was reading, the upcoming charity event we were both expected to attend. But even as we talked, I felt the weight of his earlier words settle in my chest. I had spent so long being Graham's wife that I wasn't sure who I was outside of him. And the worst part? I wasn't sure if I even knew how to find her again. As we finished our meal, Arthur glanced at his watch and sighed. I should get going. I nodded, suddenly unsure of what to say. He hesitated before speaking again. Eleanor. If you ever just need someone to talk to. I shook my head. Arthur, I mean as a friend, he said quickly. Nothing more. Something flickered in his eyes, something unspoken, restrained. But I saw it. And I think he knew that I did. I exhaled softly. Thank you. Arthur nodded and stood, sliding a few bills onto the table before I could protest. He turned to leave but hesitated. Then, in a move so small I almost missed it, he reached out, his fingers brushing lightly against my wrist. A touch so fleeting it could have been accidental. But it wasn't. I felt it. And it sent a shiver down my spine. I didn't go home right away. Instead, I wandered through the city streets, letting the cold wind sting my skin, clearing my thoughts. I told myself I was overthinking it. That it was just a conversation. But the truth was, Arthur had given voice to something I hadn't dared to say aloud. I had been fading for years. And no one had noticed. Not even Graham. By the time I returned home, the house was quiet. Graham was still at work. I set my purse down on the kitchen counter and sighed, running a hand through my hair. Then I saw it. A note on the counter, written in Graham's neat, precise handwriting. Working late. Don't wait up. That was it. No love, Graham. No explanation. Just another evening spent alone. I exhaled slowly, staring at the words until they blurred. I should have been used to it by now. But tonight, for some reason, it felt different. He doesn't see you, Eleanor. Arthur's words echoed in my mind, louder than ever. And for the first time, I allowed myself to wonder. If Graham wasn't seeing me anymore, why was I still waiting for him to? That night, as I lay in bed beside Graham, his steady breathing filling the silence, I realized something. It wasn't just about him not seeing me. It was about the fact that I had stopped seeing myself. I turned my head slightly, watching him in the dim glow of the moonlight filtering through the curtains. His face was peaceful, his features relaxed in sleep, and yet, he felt like a stranger. How had we come to this? How had we drifted so far apart that I could be lying next to him, wrapped in the same sheets, and still feel utterly alone? I thought back to the early years of our marriage, the way he used to reach for my hand without thinking, the way his gaze would soften when I entered a room. The small, effortless gestures that had once reassured me of his love. Had they faded gradually, slipping away so slowly that I hadn't noticed? Or had I simply been blind to their absence, convincing myself that marriage was supposed to evolve this way? I closed my eyes, trying to summon the warmth I used to feel in his presence. But it wasn't there. Instead, there was only a quiet ache. And for the first time, I allowed myself to admit what I had been avoiding for years. I wasn't happy. The next morning, I woke with a heaviness in my chest, a weight that pressed down on me the moment I opened my eyes. I turned toward Graham, but he was already out of bed, the sheets cool where he had once been. I could hear the faint sound of water running in the bathroom. By the time I entered the kitchen, he was pouring himself a cup of coffee, already dressed in his tailored suit, his tie knotted perfectly. "Morning," he said, barely glancing up from his phone. I hesitated, watching him. I wanted to tell him. I wanted to say, "Graham, do you see me? Do you even know who I am anymore? But the words caught in my throat, too tangled with years of silence. Instead, I reached for the coffee pot, pouring myself a cup as well. He checked his watch, then grabbed his briefcase. I have a long day. I'll be home late. I nodded, my grip tightening around the warm ceramic of my mug. And then he was gone. No kiss. No lingering touch. Just the sound of the door closing behind him. I exhaled slowly, staring at the space he had just occupied. This was my life. This was my marriage. And I had let it happen. I didn't know where to start, but I knew I had to start somewhere. So that morning, instead of folding the laundry or responding to emails or checking Graham's schedule, things that had become my autopilot routine, I did something different. I went to the bookstore. The same one I had visited a few days ago. The same one that had awakened something in me. When I stepped inside, the familiar scent of paper and ink wrapped around me like an embrace. It was quiet, the kind of place where the world slowed down, where time didn't feel like it was slipping through my fingers. I wandered through the aisles, running my fingers along the spines of books, lingering over titles that caught my eye. For the first time in years, I allowed myself to be aimless. To browse without a purpose, without rushing, without thinking of what needed to be done next. And then, tucked between two thick novels, I found a book I had loved in my 20s. I pulled it from the shelf, my heart clenching at the sight of the worn cover. I had read it over and over again back then, losing myself in its pages. I had underlined passages, scribbled thoughts in the margins, felt understood in ways I couldn't explain. I had forgotten about this book. I had forgotten about the woman who once read it. I bought it without hesitation. And as I left the store, the bag clutched tightly in my hands, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. A spark. A flicker of something that had been buried beneath years of routine, of obligation, of forgetting myself. That afternoon, I sat in my garden. Not to tend to it. Not because it was expected of me. But because I wanted to. I ran my fingers through the soil, feeling the earth cool and damp beneath my skin. I plucked a stray weed, inhaled the scent of lavender that drifted through the air. I had forgotten how much I loved this. The quiet. The simplicity. The way the world felt smaller, softer when I was surrounded by something I had nurtured with my own hands. I thought about the woman I had been before Graham. Before marriage. She had been passionate. Curious. Full of dreams that weren't just tied to someone else's life. Where had she gone? And more importantly, could I find her again? That evening, when Graham came home, I was still sitting outside. He stepped onto the patio, his brow furrowing slightly as he took in the sight of me. "You've been out here all day?" I nodded. I lost track of time. There was something in my voice, something even I recognized as different. He studied me for a moment, then shrugged. "Well, dinner smells good." I blinked, confused. And then I realized. I hadn't made dinner. For the first time in years, I had forgotten to prepare a meal, to ensure everything was in place for him when he got home. I expected him to be irritated. Annoyed. Instead, he just walked inside, likely assuming I had ordered takeout. And maybe that was what struck me the hardest. That he didn't question it. That he didn't seem to notice the shift in me at all. And in that moment, I knew. I knew that if I disappeared, if I truly disappeared, he wouldn't even see the space I left behind. I had spent so long bending, molding, reshaping myself to fit into the life we had built together. But now, for the first time in years, I wasn't sure if I wanted to fit anymore. Because if I kept fading, kept vanishing into the background of my own life, one day, there might be nothing left of me at all. Weeks passed. I changed in small ways, subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniably real. I lingered at the breakfast table instead of rushing to clear Graham's dishes. I let the silence stretch, sipping my coffee slowly, savoring the warmth instead of rushing through the motions of the morning. I took walks alone, letting the world unfold around me at its own pace. I noticed things I hadn't seen in years, the way the wind played in the trees, the way the sky turned from pale blue to golden in the late afternoon. I began writing again. It had started as a whisper of a thought, a fleeting impulse that I almost ignored. But one evening, I pulled out an old leather-bound notebook, the pages still crisp and waiting. And before I could talk myself out of it, I wrote. The words came hesitantly at first, like something fragile waking from a long sleep. But soon, they poured out, unfiltered, unburdened by expectation. I wrote about the things I had lost, about the things I wanted to find again. I wrote about myself. And with every word, I felt something return to me. Something I thought I had lost forever. One evening, as Graham sat in the living room reading, I did something I had never done before. I asked him, "Graham, do you see me?" He looked up, his brow furrowed. "What do you mean?" I met his gaze, willing him to understand. "Do you see me, Graham? As a person? As someone outside of being your wife?" He frowned, setting his book down. "Eleanor, what's this about?" I took a slow, steady breath, my pulse drumming in my ears. For years, I had danced around this question. For years, I had swallowed it, buried it beneath duty and habit and the quiet ache of being unseen. But I wasn't that woman anymore. So I didn't fill the silence. I let it stretch between us, unyielding. I watched as he struggled for words, as he searched for something, anything, to reassure me. And in that silence, I knew. Arthur had been right. But more importantly, I had been right to ask. A strange sense of peace settled over me. Not the peace of resolution, but the peace that comes with clarity, with finally seeing the truth as it is, not as you wish it to be. For the first time in decades, I felt something stir within me. Something terrifying. Something exhilarating. Hope. The next morning, I packed a bag. Not to leave, not yet. But because I wanted to remind myself that I could. I drove to the coast, the sun warm on my skin, the salty breeze tangling in my hair. I walked along the shore, letting the waves chase my feet, feeling the sand shift beneath me. And for the first time in years, I felt weightless. I didn't have all the answers. I didn't know what came next. But I knew one thing with certainty. I would never let myself disappear again.